usually when I talk threats, I go through the big 4 or 5, right? Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the malicious cyber actors. I've done that a few times. I've even done it for this group. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about trends and how those trends are driven by those actors. The big areas I'm going to hit today, of course, nation-state conflicts, right? We're right in the middle of yet another example of that nation-state conflict or the attacks on a nation-state. I'm going to talk about good old espionage, right? We see that in the cyber arena. A new and worrisome activity is the pre-positioning of critical infrastructure. I'm going to talk cybercrime a bit, the scourge of ransomware. We'll talk about malign influence, really the concept of we've got a big election coming up here in the US, and what does that mean? And finish with a couple of technical vectors, supply chain attacks, some of the exploit proofs of concepts, and of course, AI, right? I said AI, everybody's got to take a drink. I encourage you the rest of the day. We'll all have a good conference. It's the theme, right, that everybody's got to talk about AI. So if I start with the events of the weekend, we've seen Hamas with that incursion into Israel. One of the big worries, of course, is there a cyber component of it? At this point, we aren't seeing that yet, right? And I say yet. We've seen some small denial of service, some small web defacements, but we're not yet seeing real state malicious actors. And believe me, there will be others that pull into this fight, right? It just won't be Hamas coming at and threatening some of the security in Israel. We've seen ongoing cyber attacks against them over a number of years, and I expect they'll see some significant events coming. We'll also see the hacktivist action, and that's a new trend the last couple of years where unaffiliated people take up, cyber arms in the defense of their cause, whether it's Russia, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's some specific freedom fighter. We've seen these hacktivists bring very substantial capability out and threaten the information flows, the stability, sometimes the financial aspects of companies, and even at times some threats into critical infrastructure. It's my expectation that in the early days it won't be so sophisticated, but at times you don't need to be super sophisticated to have that impact. But let me transition from there to an example of where we did see some of this nation-state activity, and that's Russia-Ukraine. So a couple years ago, on the eve of the invasion, right after the invasion, we were very worried about attacks on our critical infrastructure here in the US. Friends at CISA launched that campaign, Shields Up. We all went around working with industry to try to get ready, understand how could we see early warnings against this, how could we harden, how could we protect. Those attacks didn't come to the US, but that doesn't mean that Russia-Ukraine wasn't a significant cyber fight and isn't still a significant cyber fight. We saw a lot of attacks against Ukrainian critical infrastructure. And we saw innovation out of Ukraine in protecting themselves, right? What I will give Ukraine significant credit for is their ability to be resilient, right? To sustain an attack, but then to recover from it. There's a lot to be learned from Ukraine about how they were able to repair after a wiper virus and restore, how they worked with industry to get physical resiliency into their IT. Now remember, there were a lot of data centers in Ukraine, and what did they do in the immediate aftermath of the invasion? They started getting those up into the hyperscale cloud providers and getting them offshore and away from the ability to have it damaged by a missile or taken out just by the electrical grid being unstable in the area. So that resiliency is one important aspect that they developed. So we saw wiper viruses continue to be innovative and thrown at their government, their critical infrastructure, and even the civilian population in and around Ukraine. Saw a little bit of spillover. The Viasat hack, right, hit beyond the Ukraine borders, but primarily the conflict was constrained to the Ukraine borders. But what we did see was that the traditional espionage became an increasing portion of the cyber activity in and around Ukraine. So, of course, Russia wants to know the current state of the Ukrainian forces, where they're arrayed, what their ability to defend is, where they intend to go, and what they can protect. So that's a major espionage target, and Ukraine's up against that threat to their information security each and every day. But we're also seeing those espionage circles continue out of the theater of conflict. So places like Poland that are integral to the supply of Ukraine, both humanitarian and lethal aid, all of the rail lines, whether it's inside Ukraine or other places in Europe that might be transshipping some of these supplies, are under pressure. And then getting back into the US, we are seeing hacking attempts on our defense contractors. So there's a desire to understand the production rates, to understand what weapons are destined for the conflict, and then to understand what's our ability to move them into theater. So there's some specialty transportation companies that do move lethal aid into Ukraine that are also seeing significant attempts against their infrastructure by Russia.